All right, so first thing that we've got is the atlanto-occipital joint. That is a pivot joint, and it is uniaxial, and it is responsible for cervical flexion and cervical extension. And that is in the sagittal plane of the x-axis. Also, it is responsible for lateral flexion, and that would be frontal plane of the z-axis. Another joint that we have in the neck is atlanto-axial joint, and that is a pivot, also uniaxial. What we've got here is cervical rotation, and that would be in the transverse plane on the y-axis. Next, we'll move down to the radiocarpal joint, and that is a condyloid joint, and it's biaxial. That is responsible for wrist flexion and wrist extension, and that is in the sagittal plane on the x-axis. Next, we will go to ulnar deviation and radial deviation, and that would be on the frontal plane of the z-axis. Now we will go to the distal radial ulnar joint, and that would be a pivot joint, uniaxial, and that is responsible for pronation and supination, and that is in the transverse plane on the y-axis. Now what we've got is we'll do the glenohumeral joint, also known as a shoulder joint, and that is a ball and socket joint, and it's triaxial. So now what we got is flexion, shoulder extension. That will be sagittal on the x-axis, and now we have abduction and adduction. That is in the frontal plane of the z-axis. Now we've got external rotation and internal rotation, and that would be transverse on the y-axis. Last one that we have is the radiohumeral joint, also known as the elbow. That is a hinge joint, and it's uniaxial as well. So we have elbow extension, elbow flexion, and that is in the sagittal plane on the x-axis.